Okay, we should be good to go. Great.
Thanks, Casey. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you all this morning. I'm Elizabeth Murphy. I'm the Director of Creative New Jersey. And on behalf of my colleagues, Casey O'Brien and Jeanette Mitchell, thanks for being with us today. Many of you have joined us over the last couple of Wednesdays as we've been holding these statewide conversations to hear from some colleagues around the state on issues that are affecting a lot of nonprofits and small businesses and individual entrepreneurs as we manage the COVID-19 crisis. So we're really, we're grateful to everybody who's been participating with us. You know, as Casey mentioned a few minutes ago, we know that we all share with all of you the value of staying connected, of keeping our social cohesion strong, of maintaining trust in communities, helping to advance a critical dialogue around the issues that are most important, and helping to keep the timely and accurate flow of relevant information, you know, coming at everybody, right? So we know that, you know, the situation is changing as people are trying to manage how you're running your own organizations and how you're managing your lives personally. So we hope that these calls are, you know, helping people to do that work a little bit better. So we're really grateful to our colleagues today who have joined us to speak with us and share some information. We welcome the Center for Cooperative Media. We welcome WBGO, Newark Public Radio, and Shelterforce. So in just a moment, I'm going to introduce our colleagues, but I just want to ask Casey if there is anything else that you feel we need to say just about the mechanics or the logistics of our call right now for folks.
I don't think so. When we get to the Q&A portion of our conversation today, I'll remind everybody how we'll be moving forward. For example, folks on the phones would be able to unmute themselves with *6, but I will remind folks when we get to that portion.
Great, thank you. So today's briefing is going to focus on journalism, and we're going to talk a little bit about the work that our three speakers are involved with and how journalists are working to help inform our communities, the leadership work of local reporters, which is so important, and specifically how that work helps to expose social and racial injustice that's being exacerbated by this crisis. So we're going to start off with our friend and colleague, Stefanie Murray. Stefanie is the director for the Center for Cooperative Media. So Stefanie's going to talk to us for about 7 minutes or so, and then we're going to open up to a Q&A with Stefanie. And then we're going to welcome our friend and colleague, Brit Harley from WBGO, followed by Miriam Axel-Lute from Shelterforce. So the Q&A that we'll do with Brit and Miriam will be a joint Q&A. We're going to do a Q&A first with Stefanie because she's got another meeting that she has to go to. So we're going to let her jump a little earlier. So Stefanie, you can go ahead and unmute your call.
Sounds good. Great, thank you. I'm really grateful to be here. Yeah, I have to get to another call, but more importantly, I have two small children here with me who are watching Thomas the Train. And so if you hear them screaming, it's because I need to flip to the next episode. So hopefully that doesn't happen in the next 7 minutes, as I'm sure many of you understand. So I'm with the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. And we support local journalism throughout the state of New Jersey. Our flagship program is the New Jersey News Commons. So that's our network of news organizations. So a big reason why we exist is to help grow and strengthen and improve the news ecosystem in the state of New Jersey, which has changed. As you all know, much better than I do in your local communities, how much it's changed over the last 10 years. And so normally what we do are things like coaching, training, professional development. We do some small grant work. We coordinate collaborative reporting projects across the state. We do research into local news ecosystems. But now in the case of the coronavirus and the pandemic, we've really pivoted pretty quickly to focus on supporting news organizations now. So a lot of people don't quite understand that journalists are essential workers, and having accurate information can mean the difference between life and death. And journalists are digital first responders. So one of the things that they've been struggling with now that we've been trying to help is that many of them have financially been struggling over the last 5 to 10 years as the landscape has changed and as business models have changed. And now we are in a time of crisis, and local news and information is more important than it has been in many of our recent lifetimes. And it's happening at a time that a lot of journalists are trying just to feed their own families too. And so a lot of our work has been focused on helping them to continue to report in their communities. And a lot of our work has also been trying to focus on communities that are underserved or have never been served by mainstream or any other media. Communities also that are immigrant communities that don't speak English and don't have access to the internet, who couldn't, many people in our state can't join a Zoom call at any given time of day. And so we are trying to figure out how we can support journalists who can serve all of those different communities. So one of the things we started doing pretty quickly right away is just reaching out and asking journalists what they needed and how we could help them. One of the things that we've heard from them is they need financial help, just like a lot of restaurant owners and other small businesses. Many of them will be applying for small business loans to try to get through this process. There are some national large foundations and companies that are making relief funds available just for journalists. And so we've been helping them apply for those. We've been also providing community, helping journalists talk to each other about what it's like to be on the front lines of documenting what's happening. We have been working to provide some grants, small grants to help, especially freelancers in different communities. Our ethnic and community media partners across the state improve their coronavirus reporting. We're hosting a telebriefing on Friday. We're making some grants in that area as well. And then we started some story sharing. Another thing that's been important for us to support our colleagues is to prevent duplication of work. They are so focused on covering what's happening in their local communities that it's hard sometimes to pay attention to what's happening statewide so that they can give that statewide information to their local organizations. So we've provided story sharing. So we have a daily newsletter that goes out. It's called Covering COVID-19, and it includes all different stories that journalists can pick up and reprint in their publications that are done by national and statewide news organizations. We're also working on other collaborative efforts. We're working with a team of news partners now to launch a project to chronicle the life of everyone who died in our state due to COVID. And we're hoping to put together a statewide coalition to do that, and just continuing every day to listen as much as we can to our partners and respond to their needs. So any questions? I'm happy to answer. Anything else you want me to go deeper on, I'm happy to do that too. I've been watching the clock to make sure I keep under 7 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Thanks so much for all of that information and giving us really a great sort of bird's eye view of how the center is working throughout the state to support the ecosystem of journalism and journalists. So, so we want to open it up to some conversation here. You can put your question in the chat function, or you can use the raise your hand function. I'm going to turn the moderating of this Q&A over to my colleague, Casey. So take it away, Casey. And thanks again to Stephanie for being with us.
Great, thank you. So just as a reminder to folks, you can put your questions into the chat function. You can raise your hand if you would like to do that. And then for those folks who are on the phones, you can star and unmute yourself by hitting, you can unmute yourself by hitting *6, and then we'll be able to hear you. I will periodically check in with the folks on the phone in case they have conversations. So Mike, I see that you have a hand, so I've gone ahead and unmuted you if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Hey everyone, my name is Mike Rispoli. I work for Free Press and I run the News Voices program and I'm a collaborator with Stefanie and Brit. And so thank you for having everyone on. We're talking about this really important topic. Stefanie, a question I had for you was, since a lot of the folks on the call, they're not necessarily like within the journalism space, but they do really important community work and work very closely with a lot of the different efforts that are happening locally. Is there any thoughts or tips that you could provide for them so that they can best connect with journalists, so those really important stories that they're seeing or happening on the ground can get covered or lifted up by local news?
That's a good question. So one of the first ways is through the center. I mean, we maintain, sorry, there's trains now being built behind me. We maintain a database of news organizations across the state, and we've recently mapped the local news ecosystem. So we can also serve, if you don't know a local journalist or a local news organization, we are very happy to help find one for you and connect you to a journalist who can tell your story. Some of the large news organizations have open tip lines, and I don't discourage you from sending your tips to some of the larger news organizations, but I also would highly encourage you to seek out local media makers and journalists who cover your community and know your community very intimately. There are not local independent news organizations in every single municipality geographically in our state. But there's a growing number of independent news organizations. And so I would say, looking through the resources that we offer, and I can send these links afterward, our database of newsletters, asking us, and we're happy to connect folks with local journalists and local freelancers too, because there are a lot of journalists and storytellers in this state who don't necessarily work for a traditional news organization, who are still amazing storytellers. And we try to also support them and then help get their work placed and published too.
Great, thanks, Stefanie. We've got a couple of questions coming in over chat. One is, what is the role of photography in this? And then also, where can people donate to support local journalism? So I don't know if you want to take those in turn.
Yeah, so the donation question is a good question. So there are a couple of ways.
Not a problem, Stefanie. It's okay.
Sorry. So there are a couple ways. So
this is life.
Right, this is life, yeah. So New Jersey has a handful of news nonprofits that can directly take tax-deductible donations. NJ Spotlight is a statewide news nonprofit. Shelterforce is a nonprofit. You'll be hearing from Shelterforce soon. Civic Story is a nonprofit, and then also Montclair Local is a nonprofit. We're working with several other news organizations across the state who are trying to convert to nonprofit status as well. So there are a handful that do take those tax-deductible donations. WNYC and WHYY also take donations and cover our areas. But there is not actually currently like a larger fund that people can donate to that could support local news. And it's something that has been talked about before. I'm also trying to encourage local news organizations to try. There's a new tool from the Local Media Association. So if any of you on the call are in touch with journalists who are struggling, the Local Media Association has developed a tool for for-profit news organizations to accept tax-deductible donations, and it runs through the Local Media Association's foundation. So we're trying to get a bunch of New Jersey news organizations to test that out so that they can accept tax-deductible donations from local people who want to support their work. Remind me of the WBGO too.
Sure.
Brit, I saw the link in there too. You can donate, of course, to WBGO as well. The other question,
Yep.
Casey, I missed that, sorry.
The other question was the role of photography in telling the story of what's happening.
Oh my God, the role of photography is so, is such an integral part of storytelling. And unfortunately, a lot of the places where some of the stories that need to be told are happening, photographers are not being allowed in. And this is happening across the country. We in New Jersey have a couple of healthcare systems that have been allowing photographers to come in, and that's been great. We've also utilized freelance photography too to share content across the state of New Jersey. And photographers, just like even more so in many cases than reporters, are really putting themselves at risk too, because they physically have to be where things are happening, which writers in some cases don't. They are able to do phone or Zoom chats or whatever, but photographers really have to be there and be on the front lines. And there's a really small handful of them in our state who have the backing, who have financial backing, who have the PPE to actually do that. And so Tom Franklin, who works for Montclair State, is one of those people who's doing freelance work. The Holy Name in Teaneck actually has been making its staff photos available publicly. And so it's just incredibly important. And that's one thing I actually worry a little bit about, is that we're not visually capturing the pandemic as much as we could be right now.
Great. Thanks, Stefanie. So Kevin Davis, who had his hand up, has also done me the favor of popping his question into the chat. He's concerned that there hasn't been any demographic information released about those who have been tested and those who have tested positive. Do you know of folks in the media who are covering that right now?
Yes. Yeah, such a good point. Yes. So nationally, this issue is thankfully finally starting to get a little bit more scrutiny. And in New Jersey has released a little bit of demographic data over the last couple of press briefings. I think since like mid last week, they've been releasing some demographic data, but it's not enough. But there's not enough data, period, for a lot of different things surrounding the coronavirus. But I do know that there are reporters following that. I know NJ.com and again, that reporter have both been digging into this a little bit. Oh, there, Mike just dropped an NJ.com link into the chat there for you to look at following that, because this is a huge problem, especially in different parts of our state. There are racial disparities that are not being reported on, and there's not enough being done to address, to prevent this issue. I know this is a problem. We've read some reporting out of Newark. I read a little bit of reporting that was really rough this morning that didn't have a lot of data, but looked a little bit at South Jersey and Camden as well. So yeah, there are people looking at it, but there's just not enough information being released. And I wish there were more journalists that were on the ground here in Jersey who could dig into this right now.
Great. Thanks, Stefanie.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. So there was one other comment and question that came up from a couple of people. Do you know anything about, sort of possibly addressing maybe a misinformation campaign? I don't know anything about it. Do you know anything about something called the Epic Times? There was a paper inserted into the Star Ledger that seemed to some people highly inflammatory. A lead story was "Lies Kill, Truth Saves, the Chinese Communist Party has been endangering the world." Is that a paper that's familiar to you or any of the other journalists on the call, and why that might have been inserted?
That is not familiar to me. Was it I don't know, Brit or Mike, if that sounds familiar to you. Was that an advertising insert that was masquerading as news, I wonder? That could be an issue.
Possible.
Yeah. So mis and disinformation is a massive issue currently, globally. We work quite a bit with First Draft, which is an organization that works with journalists around the world to collaboratively fight mis and disinformation. We've also been watching the work of the International Fact-Checking Alliance, which has partners in the United States as well. So there's a couple different things at play here. One, that particular insert could have been an advertorial type thing. If so, I would hope that the Star Ledger would watch that a little bit more carefully if it was something that should not have been inserted or printed, because newspapers traditionally, they should have very specific standards for what can be put in their newspapers. But we're seeing more and more disinformation socially on social campaigns through WhatsApp, through Facebook, through Instagram, through Twitter. New Jersey has not been considered a hot spot because we actually were talking with First Draft about hosting a fellow here to specifically monitor and look for disinformation in New Jersey and alert journalists to what they were seeing. We didn't get the funding for that because we're not considered necessarily a hot spot, but that does not mean that it's not occurring. And it's really hard for journalists to, it's really hard for journalists to fight this because not only does it give misinformation, give people the wrong information, but it also tends to to push them to not trust journalists too. So it's also a little bit of a double-edged sword there. Thank you for some of those links too from Tom, I saw, and Mike in the chat.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie. As of right now, I'm seeing sort of a close to the questions. I do want to just take a moment and go to the phones. So if anybody who is just joining us by phone has a question that they'd like to ask, we can have you unmute yourself by hitting the star key and then the 6 key. So if anyone on the phones has a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it. I'll just pause here momentarily for anyone who might have a question. Okay. If for whatever reason there is another question that comes up from our phone lines, oh, sorry, did I hear somebody?
Casey, I have a comment. It's Susan Haig. Is that possible?
Hi, Susan. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. I have spotty internet. Sorry about that. So I hope I don't freeze. But I just wanted to, first of all, thank Stephanie for all the work, and to add Food Bank News is another nonprofit news site. So we now have a good collection of 5 in New Jersey. And I just also wanted to say, compounding strategies on this, that the conversation of what happens.
Oh, Susan, I think we lost you again.
Crisis, how we reemerge, and mental health is hugely for that. Yeah, so civic stories on that side of the conversation. I just want to thank both Irene and Bob for their support on that.
Great, thanks, Susan.
Sure.
Okay, so I think we're probably at a close with Stephanie. So Elizabeth, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Casey. So I know all of us, let's just thank Stephanie for her time today and for the information. Thanks, Stephanie, for being with us. I also want to say thanks to everybody who has participated in sharing out information. So there's lots of great information on the chat function. You can save that chat before we actually log off the call today. So you'll have time to save all of that information if you haven't captured it in real time. Not to worry. We actually stay on this call for 10 or 15 minutes after the 11 o'clock hour for anybody who wants to continue to chat for a few minutes, and it gives people time to get the information out of the chat function. So this is not like a webinar that just ends, right at the end of the hour. So Stephanie, you can stay or jump and manage your time as you need to, but thanks very much. So now we're going to introduce our friend and colleague, Brit Harley. Brit is the News Voices Fellow at WBGO, Newark Public Radio. And we were really excited to be able to get to know Brit and work more closely with her with our work in Newark. We've got a lot of our Newark Call to Collaboration colleagues on the call with us this morning. We've got a couple of host team members with us. So Brit, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and thanks very much for being with us today, or we can unmute you if you need it. There you go. So Brit, if you can share with us a little bit about the work that WBGO is doing and what you're learning about what's happening in Newark and surrounding communities.
Sure. Thank you for introducing me and having me on this call. First, I just want to say hey to Megan down there from Dodge. We're in Hollywood Squares, how I have mine set up. So you're bottom from me. Hey to Mike from News Voices. We work together. So before I talk a little bit about what I do, I like to share about who I am. And so I'm a Newark native from the South Ward of Newark, born and raised. I value community, I value family, I value love. And I joined the news department in July at WBGO, Newark Public Radio, as a Newark resident, to think about how do we include Newarkers in the information process? How do we make news content that is community centered and include community members in this process? And so in the wake of COVID-19, what our newsroom has just been doing is really covering what's been happening, not just in Newark, but New Jersey at large, and also NYC as well. So if you go to WBGO.org on our homepage, you can check out our coronavirus coverage specifically. There are also other news stories as well. And so with the News Voices Project, and as a News Voices Fellow, the major part of it is not just including Newarkers in the information process, but also figuring out where the gaps are. And so a lot of the conversations I've been having with Newark residents in the wake of COVID is, one, I've spoken to a resident who was in a high-risk area currently in the Fairmount Heights area of Newark, and she's in transitional housing. She received an eviction letter as of last Monday, has been struggling with getting access to clean water because there's limited access where she currently is living. And so that's just an example of some of the conversations and some of the challenges that residents are facing. Some residents are also been afraid of the over-policing as well. And so with some of the conversations with those residents who would be willing to share those, we've been including those community voices in our on-air newscast. And so, you know, WBGO is a 24-hour jazz station, but throughout the day, we do have news live on air. And so community voices sharing their own stories, sharing their own experiences during these times, have been shared on air. Another thing that I wanted to mention is also every month we have a monthly show, Newark Today with Mayor Baraka. We'll actually have a show tomorrow where folks can call in live to ask questions since there's been, you know, a stay in place in Newark, and we've been doing different things to mitigate COVID here. Even back in March, if you go on WBGO.org, you can listen to last month's call talking about social distancing and some other conversations in terms of concerns that some Newarkers may have had. So that's another way that we also are including community members in COVID, and also Newark Today being one outlet. Specific to the initiatives that I'm gearing up for, in partnership with the Free Press, and thinking about residents who may have limited internet access or no internet access at all, or maybe won't be on a video call, we're setting up a community info tree. And so right now I'm looking for folks to be phone captains. Thanks to the Dodge Foundation, where we were able to work out an honorarium for folks to get in communication with other people who may need access to information and resources during this time, so we can be able to share what folks need with, you know, mutual aid efforts that are currently happening, but to also share those things with local officials and to help us really understand what type of news we should be generating and where some of the information gaps may be. Another thing that I would like to mention on this call before I wrap up, I know I only have a little bit more time. We'll be announcing a story fund. If you are covering COVID, if you are collecting stories, if you are serving communities of color, WBGO and the Free Press wants to be a hub. How can we connect to community organizations, other residents, to hear from them, to tell their own stories? But we also understand that there are some of those projects that are already happening. And so there will be an opportunity for you to apply for support, to potentially get funding, to have some of those projects happening in partnership with WBGO. And I'll wrap up with next week, Tuesday, we'll be hosting a town hall. And so this town hall will be centered around just giving community members the opportunity to connect with one another, to talk about what they've been seeing in their communities, what solutions they may have they may need context to. And so we want to hear from you all. Like, what information do you need to be safe and healthy in your community? And so that's a conversation the Free Press and WBGO will be hosting next Tuesday. There are a few other initiatives and some other things and ways that organizations can partner. I think would have come of this digital conversation we're having will be ongoing with community newsrooms. And so we are looking for community organizations who want to think about how to get information to, you know, whoever they serve, in whichever way that they serve, and how WBGO and myself can be a partner in making that happen.
Thanks, Brit. Thanks for all of that information. So who has some, oh no, sorry. We're gonna actually go straight to Miriam, and then we're gonna do a Q&A back with you, Brit. So thank you for all of that. So now let's introduce our colleague, Miriam Axel-Lute. Miriam is the Assistant Director and Editor at Shelterforce. They're based in Montclair. Thanks very much for being with us today, Miriam. So if you wanna go ahead and unmute your line, you can share with us some of what Shelterforce is learning about what's going on in communities, you know, during this COVID-19 crisis from your community development lens. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So the quick introduction to Shelterforce, we're a nonprofit publication. We were born in New Jersey, in Orange and East Orange in the 70s as a tenant organizing newspaper. And over the years, we've grown to cover affordable housing and the whole community development world. So though we're headquartered in New Jersey and very much feel ourselves part of this community, we are actually a national publication, and we cover things over the whole country that are focused on affordable housing and people who are working in communities in various ways. Many nonprofit readers who work in revitalization, neighborhood revitalization, community development, housing, organizing for regional equity, tenant rights, and things like that. So as a publication that has served this community, we do a lot of long form how-to articles looking at trends in the field, things that help our readers. And with COVID-19, we've pivoted to more breaking news than we usually do, or at least more time-sensitive topics, shorter turnaround, more freelancers. So it's been a pretty big shift for us, but it's been important to us to try to keep our readers informed as things are, as everyone has mentioned, changing very frequently. So some of the kinds of things that we've been running include an article by some legal aid lawyers that explains all the different kinds of eviction moratoriums that there can be and why they need to actually cover all the phases of eviction and not just one phase. So you need to cover filing and serving and enforcing all these various steps, because if you only do one, you're going to have this backlog at the end, or you may kick people out if an eviction has already started, and we really need to keep people in their homes to keep them safe. So, and then we've expanded on that to look at ways that different nonprofit housing organizations are leading the way and saying that they won't evict for non-payment of rent, and how they're going to be working with their residents, but then also what's affecting them. They're losing rent, and they want to be able to continue to provide affordable housing into the future. So how are they working with that? How are they turning to their lenders and looking for forbearance? We're also covering a lot of tenants' rights things. We had an article last week about a tenant in New Orleans who was illegally evicted in the middle of the pandemic. And it was a terrible story, but the result of publishing it was that 5 hours later, he was back in his home. We don't usually see that kind of result from an article, but I will tell you that it felt good. Right now, one little bit of hope. So we're looking at that wide range of things. We're right now looking into a bill that is being proposed in New Jersey by Brittany Timberlake about trying to get all the lenders to move. One of the things that it would do is, if you're getting mortgage forbearance, it wouldn't then accrue and you have to pay it back after the forbearance, right after the forbearance is over, because who's going to have extra money right then, but that it would be tacked on to the end and extend the length of your loan, the term of your loan, which makes a lot more sense for both homeowners and nonprofits and small businesses, for everyone. We hope that if they're getting help with their debt right now, that it doesn't turn around and has a big cliff where they have to pay it all back within just a few months. So we're looking at efforts like that. And of course, we're following efforts about the stimulus at the federal level and trying to get more housing support in there, especially rent relief. So I think that's a quick summary. I will say, you know, if anybody in New Jersey is seeing things that they that fall within our broad topics that they think we should know about, we're definitely interested in hearing your stories.
And for those of you who are looking at the chat, Miriam has supplied, you know, links to Shelterforce's main page, also to their COVID-19 resource page, and then an email to email tips for those kinds of stories that might be appropriate for Shelterforce as well.
I should also mention, just so you know, how we have a weekly email newsletter, which I should have sent you the sign up link for also, but I'll put it in the chat if anybody wants to keep up with what we're doing. Thank you.
Great. And Miriam, your colleague Kelly is also with us on the video chat today. So I'm not putting Kelly on the spot, but I would say, Kelly, if you wanted to unmute yourself, if you wanted to add anything to what Miriam said, you know, we'd be happy to welcome you to do that, but not to put you on the spot, of course.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi. Thank you, Miriam. I just wanted to underscore what Miriam said. I've, you know, even just in listening to the other speakers and presenters on the call, I think that there is a real potential for us to work together. We're always looking for local stories to help to put a face to some of the larger national issues. And so please consider Shelterforce a resource and reach out to us if you have, you know, if you have, you know, issues that are challenging and that you're not finding solutions to, but also if you have things that have been resolved, or if you have a particular contact for something and you think that it can be shared, we're always happy to have those connections. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. So let's open it up. Let's have a conversation here. Does anybody have any questions for Brit or Miriam or Kelly? Or if you've got, yeah, we'll start with questions and then we can move to if folks have some other pieces of information that you want to share with the whole group. So Casey, I'll turn it over to you to moderate.
Great. So again, a reminder, you can raise your hand if you've got your participant tab open in the Zoom call. Let's start with the phone, see if anybody who is just joining us by phone has a question or a comment they want to add here. *6 to unmute yourself. Also, feel free to pop questions into the chat box if you're here on video. So anybody who's just joining us by phone have any questions or comments? And that's a *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, so we may not have anyone from phones. If you do, feel free to start at 6, unmute yourself and let us know. And if there's questions from the other participants here, again, you can pop your questions in or raise your hand. While we're waiting on that, I will say, you know, Miriam, I signed up for the newsletter from Shelterforce, found it very, very valuable and very useful to hear about what's going on, particularly in terms of housing and a lot of the tenants' rights issues that we're facing that are being exacerbated because of this. And, you know, I sort of wonder if there are any other stories that either you or Brit can share about some of the other issues that you might be hearing about from the communities that you're in contact with and the people that you're talking to. We do have a question from Megan Van Dyke, so let's take that first. Questions from the participants are more important, so we'll go here. Megan, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Megan from the Dodge Foundation. It's so great to see everyone. My question is about, so Shelterforce covers arts and culture, and WBGO obviously being a jazz station as well. Arts and culture is very much part of the heart of the station. I'm curious, like thinking about through like that lens and how the arts heal and how, you know, the tying that within like the power of storytelling and journalism. How are you, you know, maybe we're not there yet because there's just such a need right now for basic news and information, but how are you thinking about like infusing creativity or, you know, highlighting stories of resilience or, you know, just with Shelterforce and BGO being here, I wanted to see what some of your initial thoughts on that might be.
You know, I'm always thinking about what we can do differently. And now that we've pivoted to this digital space, I've definitely been thinking of how do we engage but still create an experience. And so been asking that question around what it looks like. I don't know. That's something that I'm still figuring out, but it's something that I've definitely have been thinking about because I think a big part of informed communities, especially when I think about Newark, a lot of our information sharing and conversations that I'm a part of, a lot of the times happen in the arts and culture community here. And so finding ways to really bridge that, I think, you know, I've seen some storytelling initiatives happen. So also positioning WBGO as a media partner to some of these independent media, creative photography, different things that are already happening, and how can we use our platform to amplify that? So that's something definitely tangible that's happening, but looking to push that a little bit further.
I would say it is very early for us, and because I focus on our small editorial staff. I focus on the arts and culture pieces and coverage, and for me right now, I think it is early. I've been reading, I've been collecting stories that I've seen. A couple of other resources that I follow have been sharing some stories, but for me, what's most interesting will be the long-term effects of this on arts and culture and community development. I feel like artists and communities were just starting to kind of get their footing, and this is really going to be a huge blow to them, is what I'm also hearing and understanding. We're about to repost a piece from an artist who is basically talking about trying to eat and trying to live at this time, because she doesn't really have income because the work that she does can't be done. So I think there are lots of organizations who are trying to support artists, and we know that there are grants that are being given out, but I think we also know that there's no way that it's enough. And so for me right now, it's really just trying to get an understanding of how these folks are going to survive, like actually survive, and keep a roof over their heads and eat and support their families without being able to do the work that they do on a regular basis. But I think the long-term story in communities and the role of arts and culture will be about resilience, which Shelterforce has covered, and the role that arts and culture can play in communities in building resilience. But for me, at least, I don't feel like we're quite there yet and ready to start asking those questions, but really just at this point helping to get people access to like life-saving resources. I don't know, Miriam, if you want to add.
Certainly. I mean, what Kelly said is very true. We've been focused very much on the immediate implications, but there are going to be long-term ones, and we need to think about that role in recovery. And one of the things that I think I'd like to start with and look at, that I've been hearing a little bit about it in my calls, is how people, say resident services coordinators, are trying to help folks overcome isolation while they're stuck in their homes, and what that implies for our ability to help people who are already isolated for various reasons, and what the role of various arts and culture strategies can be in that, and how we adapt to the current. So one direction that we may be going, but I think there's going to be a lot more.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Williams-Riley with the American Conference on Diversity. And I've been reading a lot and hearing a lot about the statistics that disproportionately impact particularly African-American communities and communities of color and mental health. Is there a way for artists to think about and utilize their talents and skills to help others heal through art? And have you thought about building resilience through this digital age of displaying art, or having artists talk about the creative process and helping people use time of isolation to heal? I've just been hearing a lot about the artists and other people who are in isolation and saying they're doing artwork or they're doing some form of art. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
We did just, or do you want, Kelly, did you have something? We did just run, and this is pre-planned, pre-pandemic, but examples of artwork that were made by people who were formerly incarcerated, and I think that that's a good example of people using art to deal with social injustices and other things. And I bet that there is, I think you're right, there's going to be a lot of art that comes out of that. And it's a very good question. How can we share that and have what people are creating help other folks? And, I would ask Megan if she's heard anything more about anybody starting to think about how to do that, because I haven't heard of any yet.
I mean, I think that I'll jump in here for a second. I think Art Pride New Jersey, which is the statewide arts advocacy organization, is starting to help, potentially organize some artists in a way that will help them to get more of their work online. I know the New Jersey Theater Alliance has been, they're the statewide service organization for all of the professional theaters in the state. So with their members, they've been holding some weekly roundtable Zoom calls, just like what we're doing and everybody else, to try to help that community kind of figure out how they will continue to create their work, while people are actually not allowed to go into their theaters. And there's lots of individual arts organizations that are offering some really innovative, creative, exciting online content. So, so I would say to everybody, even though Creative New Jersey, we're not an arts organization, we're about creativity in the broadest sense of creativity across the sectors. I would just encourage everybody here to reconnect with the arts organizations that you were previously engaging with, right? Because for sure, they're creating some kind of online content, for sure. And if they haven't produced it yet, they're probably about to. Lots of classes are moving online. And there's some spoken word things that are going online, and other music and so forth. So it's a way to avail yourself of that. Any other questions for Brit?
Yeah, there's one more question that I think can go out to a couple of different folks. There was one about shelter and transitional housing and what's happening to people there, but also we have a question that is about is there anyone covering local small business and their journey through COVID, things like accessing stimulus funding, how entrepreneurs and storefronts are anticipating the potential for their ability to survive in these times and navigate and potentially also grow through this process. So it's two questions. I think, if anyone wants to tackle one versus the other, go ahead, but I wanted to make sure that those two at least were honored and voiced here.
Yeah, I've spoken to folks in transitional housing, shelters. And so one particular place here in Newark that I mentioned is in the high risk area. Newark is predominantly a community of color. And so in that community, there are some concerns about the over policing, but more so concerns about how to properly social distance. The resident that I've been in communication with, she would usually set up her day knowing where to go get hot food and meals because they aren't able to keep like fridges and stoves in their rooms. And so, you know, this is how much water I'm going to drink. So she's really been impacted by COVID in a lot of ways because she normally wouldn't have to spend as much time as she would inside of her living arrangement currently. And so, you know, just concerns around how to properly social distance, concerns about the place not really being sanitized or kept during these times. And so, you know, just access to gloves, masks, food. Something that resident mentioned in transitional housing is, you know, even with a lot of the efforts that are supplying food and different things like that, for folks who might not have a stove or a fridge or might have to share some of those things, you know, she mentioned canned goods might be an alternative, or what are ways that we can really meet the needs of folks who are inside of different types of living situations during these times. And so that's just some of the challenges that I can share that folks have been experiencing who are in shelters in transitional housing.
Yep. Yeah, the situation for the homeless folks and folks who are in transitional housing is very serious. And if anybody is deeply interested in that, there's calls every Monday the National Low Income Housing Coalition is hosting that have a lot of folks on the line who are talking about that. And we're going to be drawing some stories out of there. But, you know, top concerns among shelters, of course, are allowing people, figuring out how to have people social distance or quarantine if they need. There's a lot of movement all around the country to try and get the most vulnerable folks into single, you know, rooms, whether they're in motels or hotels or other things. And then there's a question and a story that we're actually working on right now about whether eviction moratoriums apply to less traditional housing, such as folks or service employees who are living, paying week to week in a motel. Are they protected by these laws? And it's patchwork. It's different in different places. So we're looking into that. But it's a huge issue. And the answer is it varies a lot from place to place, unfortunately. Oh, and very quickly on the small businesses, just when there are nonprofit lenders involved or any lenders involved, I think the first thing that needs to be done along with the PPP application is talking to lenders about forbearance right away, even before they know that they need that. If you're lucky enough to have a nonprofit landlord, you're probably getting some break on the rent, but a lot of other ones are not. And it's a tough situation for them as well.
Yeah, thanks, Miriam. We've just got a couple of minutes left here. There's lots of information that's in the chat function, so we just want to thank everybody for putting all of that really helpful info into that function. You can all save your whole chat by clicking on the 3 dots that are in the bottom. I think we're all getting so Zoom savvy. But if you're not sure how to save it, we're going to stay on this call for a few minutes afterwards, because I know folks like to continue the conversation a little bit and connect with each other. So we're not going to end this right away. But I just want to ask our Creative New Jersey team member, Jeanette Mitchell. Jeanette, do you want to just unmute yourself and just say hello to folks? You know, Jeanette, among other things, manages all of Creative New Jersey's social media. So Jeanette, you just want to say hello and give a plug to make sure people are connected to us?
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. So I just posted in the chat all of our social media pages that you can connect with us. We're on Instagram, of course, LinkedIn, Twitter, and we have 10 Facebook groups that you can find different groups, different places that you might live in New Jersey to connect with. And then, of course, you can connect with our overall Facebook page. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jeanette. So we're going to continue these calls for, you know, certainly through the month of April and probably through to the end of May. We've gotten some good response from them. So we're going to keep going. We're going to do a call next week. It's going to have an education focus, right? So the state of education in New Jersey in light of the COVID-19 crisis. So we've got our friend and colleague John Mooney from NJ Spotlight, who's going to share from his point of view what's happening around the state. We've got Patrick Wall from Chalkbeat, who will also be with us as a guest speaker, and we hope to have a colleague from one of the major universities in New Jersey join us as well. We just don't have confirmation from her just yet, but we expect to hear from her any minute. So that'll be next week. We are also putting together a call on a briefing on how people with disabilities are managing the COVID-19 crisis and some resources for them. So we're really grateful to be working with our friends and colleagues, Crystal Allen from Eyes Like Mine. I think Crystal's on our call today, and Debbie Duncan from the Center for Nonprofits. So we thank them for working with us and producing that call. So we don't have the firm date yet, but we'll let everybody know. We also want to do a call around mental health and some health challenges. So, you know, we look to all of you guys, like if you've got some suggestions for some guest speakers, or you've got some expertise in that area, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us. We also want to do a call around that is focused on, you know, nonprofit leaders of color, how they, you know, some of the unique challenges that their organizations are facing because of, you know, racial inequities that are just heightened and exacerbated during this crisis. So we want to put together a briefing that really educates everybody on what's happening there and how we can all take responsibility to do our part to alleviate that situation and promote and activate more social and racial justice policies in our state. So we want to put that together. I'm probably forgetting one or two, but anyway, and we're also talking about some other, you know, another economic call, right? So we're hoping maybe some of our friends at the state might be able to join us to talk more about the continuing development of state economic stimulus programs that are available to nonprofits and small businesses, and also, you know, independent consultants. So stay tuned on that. I think that's about it, unless Casey tells me that we have some other.
Yep, I got a couple of last
Right.
minute
Okay.
announcements. So as a reminder, the recording of this call will become available on our website within 48 hours. We will also have a written summary that includes all of the links that were shared in the chat box today, as well as some description of some of the topics discussed. So keep an eye out for that. The COVID-19 resource page that we have on our website, I've just dropped into the chat function. And then I want to, you know, on behalf of all of our team here, thank again our fantastic speakers, Stefanie Murray from the Center of Cooperative Media, Brit Harley from WBGO, and Miriam Axel-Lute from Shelterforce for their time, the attention that they're paying, and the stories that they're telling for our communities to make sure that we have accurate information and know what's going on. So we're incredibly grateful for them as well. And as we said, we'll stay on for this call for anyone who wants to continue talking or sharing information or resources that would be helpful. But I will go ahead and stop the recording as soon as I do one last plug, which is if you haven't filled out your census form, go to 2020census.gov and make sure that you do that. It's terribly important that we get counted accurately to make sure that we unlock the federal funding that we need. So thank you all. We'll stay on. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point.
Thank you, guys.